Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Welcome, everybody. You are watching Breakthrough News, and this, of course, is the Freedom Side. Very happy to have you with us. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Perrier, here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
Eugene, it's always great to be back alongside you.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear. If it was otherwise, I'd be a little concerned.
We'd have a problem.
We'd have a big problem. So thankfully we don't.
Yeah.
Good note to start the show on. Everything's good between Rania and I.
Yeah.
Nonetheless.
For now, guys. For now.
For now.
If you
For
want it
now.
to stay that way, become a member of Breakthrough News. Sorry.
It's a good way to put
That's
it.
where I'm taking it. That's where I'm taking it.
Sometimes you just gotta put some money out there.
If you want me and Eugene to stay on good terms, I'm threatening you with a horrible fallout. I hope it doesn't happen because I really like Eugene. But if
Good.
you want us to stay on good terms, then please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, like this very cool Breakthrough mug that I've already had a sip out of, as you can tell from my legendary lipstick stain. Anyways, and also Eugene, go ahead and say your spiel. I kind of beat you to it this time, but I had to threaten our audience with a breakup.
Well, sometimes an interjection is necessary. But of
Right.
course, we just want to go ahead and remind everyone who is watching on YouTube to take this time. Go ahead and hit subscribe just below the screen there. And then you want to make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to. And you don't have to go that far or do that much work to find all the great content we have here from Breakthrough News coming out on a daily basis, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. Recent episode came out with Rania alongside Abby Martin. I highly suggest you guys check that out. Well over 100,000 have already done so. So if you're not part of those, what are you doing? But nonetheless, if you subscribe and hit the bell, you'll never miss another thing again from Breakthrough News on YouTube. Also, just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who's watching on Free Speech TV. You don't have to do anything whatsoever. If you do want to follow us on YouTube, go ahead and do so. But we're very happy to have you here with us on Free Speech TV. And a big shout out to the whole Free Speech TV team that makes it possible for us to be here on the Freedom Side in your home on your TV set. Got a great show for you as we do. As always, Rania, I mean, you already somewhat mentioned it, but if you want to mention it again, are there things that you feel our audience should know before we start?
Yeah, in all seriousness, it is really important that if you are able to, if you have the means to, you help support independent media such as Breakthrough News. It's what helps keep us not just going, but also keep us growing in an era of a tsunami of corporate media warmongering. So you can do that by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And for as little as $5 a month, you can help support this independent media channel and all of our excellent content. I also do encourage those who are watching to make sure you not just subscribe on YouTube, but make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
Yes, it does indeed. Well, those are very good updates. Got a lot going on here for the show. The ongoing fight of Leonard Peltier for freedom, the European election scene and everything that's happening there. Some good news and exciting news from Waffle House workers whose struggle is bearing some fruit. An update on the Congo, which of course continues to be a very tragic situation, but one we have to continue talking about. India post-elections, and also Latin America and the various things that are happening there due to the genocide against the Palestinian people that's causing a number of governments and others to cut ties and continue to push popular movements in solidarity with Palestine. So pretty much every corner of the globe and a number of different struggles. So now would be the time, however you want to do so, air horn, text message, phone call, to let people know that we are here. We are on the Freedom Side. We want whoever is following you to be following us. So please let them know as we get started. I think they will thank you for doing so. But we want to move forward here with the show, and we want to start with an event that took place earlier, earlier this week, and that was a parole hearing for Leonard Peltier, long-running political prisoner here in the United States, really a legend in the fight of indigenous peoples here in the United States. So perhaps maybe even his last opportunity to get parole, but number of things and a number of pieces there, and we are very, very honored as we move forward on the show here to be joined by Nick Tilson, who is in Oglala, Lakota, and president and CEO of the Indian Collective. Nick, thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's an honor to have you here, and I wish everyone knew the story, but for those maybe who don't know Leonard's name, haven't followed his story or his case, who is Leonard Peltier, and how did he end up in this situation of being in prison for many, many decades?
Yeah, so Leonard Peltier has been incarcerated for 49 years. He was a member of the American Indian Movement, and he was organizing and supporting people actually in my community on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the 1970s, when the United States government was engaging in a counterintelligence strategy to basically destroy the American Indian Movement. But it was the same counterintelligence strategies that they were using to destroy the Black Panther Party, to disrupt the civil rights movement. And they basically chose the battleground of Pine Ridge to utilize the place to destroy the movement. And it was at a place where there was lots of resistance. There was the siege at Wounded Knee in 1973 that took there. That was a major uprising for indigenous people in my home territory, but also around the world. And there was this period of time called the Reign of Terror, in which over 60 people were murdered on Pine Ridge. One faction at that time of the corrupt tribal government was being backed by the FBI and the United States government with U.S. taxpaying dollars. And it amounted to a shootout where two FBI agents came up on a camp in Oglala, South Dakota, chasing another vehicle, and a shootout happened, and two FBI agents lost their lives, Kohler and Williams, along with Joe Stun, assassinated in that shootout, who was a member of the American Indian Movement and a member of the community, and then Leonard Peltier went on the run, and he was illegally extradited from Canada based on coerced witnesses. His co-defendants, Butler and Robidoux, were actually they actually went to trial and they were acquitted based on means of self-defense. And what they basically did, with Leonard Peltier, is they railroaded him. They coerced witnesses. They made up evidence. They manufactured ballistic evidence. And as a result, Leonard Peltier has been incarcerated for 49 years, one of the longest living political prisoners in American history.
And I'm curious if you could talk a bit about the conditions that he's been subjected to throughout his imprisonment, because he's repeatedly been denied parole over all these years. His health hasn't been in the greatest condition. So yeah, talk about some of those conditions that he's been subjected to as a political prisoner.
He's been in maximum security prison the entire time. Consistently moved from one maximum security prison to the other, whether it was Leavenworth or whether it was Pennsylvania. Right now he's in Coleman. For the past 13 years he's been in the Coleman maximum security penitentiary, and because nobody wants to work for the Bureau of Prisons, what ends up happening is maximum security prisons they're just on lockdown, sometimes 24 hours, 23 hours a day. And for somebody who's 79 years old, who's an elder, who has diagnosed with diabetes, he's been diagnosed with sleep apnea. They have a sleep apnea machine, but no plug-in to plug in that sleep apnea machine. He's 80% blind in one eye now. He's in a walker, and I was just there this weekend. I mean, I went into the prison on Monday, on Saturday, Sunday, and then I was in the hearing on Monday. He's in rough shape. He also has an aortic aneurysm that's being untreated, and then he has they don't know what's going on with his eye, because there's periods of times where his right eye periodically ends up going into where he can't see, and so he's in really rough shape. He's and he's not being tended to. In fact, we've had Leonard's lawyers have had doctors go in there and to evaluate him and to try to get them. They haven't even let an outside third party doctor do a full evaluation of him, a full exam. All that they've been able to do is collect consistent medical data of how he's been treated, and they're not giving him proper medical care. And quite frankly, the maximum security prison at Coleman doesn't have the ability to give him the level of medical care that he deserves to have.
When you hear all this, I mean, it almost feels, Nick, like in a way this is part of the point of imprisoning someone like Leonard Peltier, is to try to send a message, especially to Native people, but, really to many oppressed peoples in America of, if you stand up for your rights, you really can be punished for it. I mean, it really does seem like it's a continuation of the attempt to suppress the efforts of indigenous people here in the United States for asserting, just the right to your humanity, your culture, and your land.
Absolutely. I mean, he has been suffering in incarceration for 49 years for a crime that he didn't commit. He did not assassinate those FBI agents. The ballistic evidence, showed that he didn't assassinate them. And the reality is even former prosecutor James Reynolds even came forth and said, we actually don't know who shot it. We don't know who actually pulled the trigger and was the one who killed those agents. And therefore we don't have any evidence against Leonard Peltier to show that he's the one who did it. And so, this is political repression. I mean, when it really comes down to it, and this is, intergenerational political repression that is ongoing. I mean, he is. I believe that his punishment and what he's experiencing is cruel and it's unusual, and it is different than how other folks are treated in the system. You imagine at 79 years old, you look at any of your 79-year-old relatives on the outside of the prison right now, how much medical care that they need and how they need to be looked after as elders, and he's in there locked up, and he's struggling, and they didn't sentence him to death. That's one of the points. They did not sentence him to death, but if he continues to stay in there, he will die in prison at the hands of the government. And he's eligible for parole. He's eligible. I mean, this is his third parole hearing, and he's eligible for parole right now based on the statute. And the parole commission is supposed to be an independent body, not influenced by the FBI and not influenced by other parts of the judiciary, and law enforcement.
Nick, can you put this in the context of the U.S. genocide on Native Americans and this is essentially an attack on a political activist for indigenous rights. So can you place it in that context of the struggle for the rights of Native Americans who are still struggling against many things like that? I mean, this is like, we like to think of, this is like it was a genocide that was completed, but there's obviously still a lot happening, and there are reservations across the country. There are treaties that are not being abided by between the U.S. and various Native American tribes. So can you talk a bit about that and place Leonard Peltier's imprisonment in the context of suppressing activism around this very important issue?
Absolutely. I'll share a little bit. I mean, I testified in the parole hearing on some of this stuff. And one of the things that I said, one of the reasons why Leonard Peltier is so revered is because if you think about Leonard Peltier's incarceration and his prosecution, his rights were consistently violated the entire time. Constitutional rights were not applied to him. Witnesses were coerced, his rights were violated, and he was disregarded and he was dehumanized. Well, that is consistent with what they have done for their entire policy in treating indigenous people and oppressed people everywhere. The playbook is consistent with how they treated us and how they continue to treat us, and that's why all of us see a little bit of ourselves in Leonard Peltier, is we can relate to that injustice. You think about the Constitution of the United States. And Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution states that treaties are the supreme law of the land. That's Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. There's over 600 treaties between the United States government and Native nations. Every single one of those treaties was violated. That means every single one of those treaties was a constitutional violation. And now you look at, what is the result of that? The violation of those treaties meant land loss, the stealing of land. It meant that the extraction of resources from those land. And it meant our people living in abject poverty today. Today, indigenous people in the United States have the lowest life expectancy of any people in the entire Western Hemisphere. We live in extreme poverty conditions. The racial wealth gap between white people and indigenous people in the United States is for every $1 that a white person has, a Native person has 8 cents. That represents a 92% racial wealth gap in this country. And so this is deliberate, and it is consistent with how the United States has colonized indigenous people, violated our rights, and eroded their own laws in the process. This form of democracy has been eroded constantly and persistently because they have no regard to their own laws whenever they're trying to colonize a people, steal a people's land, extract resources, and prioritize profits and corporations over human rights and people. And so when you think of that entire history, you think of the boarding schools that they took the children away from their mothers and their fathers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers. That they washed our mouth out of soap, that they sexually abused our people, did that as a strategy to assimilate indigenous people and to exterminate the spirit and the culture within us. Leonard Peltier is actually a boarding school survivor. Some people don't know this. He survived the boarding school era. And so what you have in this moment is you have one of the longest living political prisoners incarcerated in American history, who's a survivor of the boarding schools, when America is just beginning to have some conversations about what the reckoning with that dark past. So, Leonard's been in prison for so long that it interweaves American history. And many of the things that the American Indian movement fought for and Leonard Peltier fought for did contribute to changes that we have today. For example, Native American Freedom of Religion Act was passed. The Indian Determination and Education Act that gave us the ability to control our own schools. The American Indian movement created the conditions for systematic change to begin to happen on indigenous terms. But he has never been able to reap the benefits of that work because he's been incarcerated for 49 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nick, I know we're going to be awaiting the outcome here. I don't know, maybe for some weeks in terms of the parole hearing itself. But for those who have heard this story for the first time, or maybe you're getting refreshed or whatever it may be, who want to learn more and perhaps help Leonard, where should they look? Where should they go?
They can follow at Indian Collective on all social media handles. They can follow the Land Back for the People podcast that we have. They also, they can go to IndianCollective.org and justiceforleonardpeltier.org. and continue to go, continue to follow the information as we put out. Yesterday or 2 days ago marked the first. So they have 21 days to make the decision under statute. They usually will take all 21 days, so it's looking at like around July 11th. Is when we think that they're going to make the decision. They are deliberating now about the decision around parole, and quite frankly, the opposition is heavy. The director for Ray of the FBI, our current director, weighed in, has weighed in opposition to parole. But on the other hand, you had hundreds of tribal nations, leaders from around the world, the Pope, different ones that are in support of Leonard Peltier and in support of his release. He has wide support throughout the country and throughout the world. So keep following the story. His release, when it happens, will be historic. But we are definitely in a battle, both a battle for his life, a battle for the narrative, and in the battle for justice.
Nick Tilson, Oglala Lakota, and President and CEO of the Indian Collective. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
I think it's really important to recognize, especially as we watch the genocide in Gaza play out, which we've been focusing so much on Breakthrough News, that this is part of a process that many settler colonies around the world have carried out, including the United States, where it is ongoing. I think a lot of times we think of the genocide of Native Americans as like something that happened in the past, but there's, an ongoing destruction of indigenous peoples across North America. And there's an ongoing resistance to it.
No, I think that's a great point. And just a shout out before we move on, Nick Tilson and the Indian Collective were there on November 4th at the large Palestine Solidarity March. We actually clipped Nick's speech there to that historic march of 500,000 people in solidarity with Palestine. You can find it at BT Newsroom across our social media platforms. Very much suggest you go check that out and follow Indian Collective and all their work. Now we want to move forward to Europe, where, of course, the European elections have created many ripple effects, including new legislative elections in France. A lot of talk, a lot of things happening. And so before I editorialize too much, let's just get into all the implications with our next guest. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Nadège Abomangoli, who is a former member of the French Parliament and a candidate in the upcoming French legislative elections. Nadège, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you to invite me.
Well, it is our honor to have you here. And I think just to start with maybe the headline, a lot of people are talking about the surge of the far right in France and in Europe. And I wonder how you understand that phenomenon. But I also want to ask, your party, La France Insoumise, also gained 4 seats. So is there more to the story than just the far right surge?
Yes, it's not the only story. First of all, we can say that what was expected has not really arrived. They won, I think, around 20 members, and they expected more. In France, of course, the Rassemblement National, the racist party of Marine Le Pen, became the first for this election, but we, La France Insoumise, we gained 1 million votes. If we compare this election to the previous, so that's an interesting point of view to say that party like us who wants a different policy in France to move from these liberal views to move to anti-racism is as one. And if we take the social democratic parties like the Parti Socialiste and the Ecologists, they lost some points while we gained some points, and that's a failure that we weren't together for this election. And now today, just 5 minutes ago, we have created the new Front Populaire. So that's a mess. We should have done that for the European elections.
I'm curious, when we talk about the right wing, and one thing that the right wing is trying to appeal to workers on is the immigration issue, and they do this thing, where they represent migrants as being the core to everyone's problems, particularly to the problems that workers are facing. And then, of course, there's parties like the National Rally Party that also support many anti-worker policies, like raising the retirement age. I'm curious, how do you respond to some on the left who argue that these kinds of anti-migrant policies need to be adopted in order to win over working class voters?
Well, first of all, I'd say that some party of the left don't say that we should adopt those measures. They say that that's not the core issue. And they say that, the core issue is work. The core issue is social issue. But they forget one thing. Racism is a social issue. And I think when you adopt the discourse of the far right, you are the far right. And that's not the message we have to address. I think the message we have to address is that there is no social equality when there is racial inequalities. And of course, that's a hard job. That's hard to say, mostly in the media. But we have to be courageous on that point, and we have to say that the first people that we have to convince, these are not the people who vote for the National Front since a lot of years. We have to convince those who don't vote. And that's what I would say to the people who are trying to put racial issues under the carpet. They make a great mistake, because when you see what La France Insoumise has done since 10 years, they convinced a lot of people to go and vote. When you see what La France Insoumise say with Jean-Luc Mélenchon is a man, is 70 years old. He understood a lot of things happening around those issues. He made great moves about what analysis we must make of the racial issue in France. In France, nowadays, the core issue is racism against Muslim people. Muslim people, those who seem to be Muslims. And the media has a great role in that, the rise of racism in France, and the people who are, let's say, in the political class, the bourgeoisie, is not fair in that part, because they endorse the racist views of the National Front. When you go on the media, you don't have journalists to say that what the guy in front say is false. For example, we are always alone on this fight against racism, and that's what is what is difficult, is that the intellectuals, they don't really move on this issue. A lot of cowards on this issue, a lot of fascination also on this issue, because when you say the media and the exposition of the National Front members, it's a scandal, a great scandal. We don't have the same invitations on the media, for example. They don't invite us. Or when you go on TV, you have 4 or 5 journalists who, in fact, are endorsing the National Front Party ideas. And that's a great fight. And I think in France, we can thank La France Insoumise and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, because we never stop to speak, and we are not afraid of what they can say. Because they always try to say that we are anti-Semitics, that we are the noise, the anger, but we are the noise and the anger that is within the nation. And in that situation, I think this role is major, and we have to play that role.
And on a related issue, I know you were recently in Senegal with Mr. Mélenchon there on a delegation. Obviously, a lot happening in Senegal, a lot happening in Francophone Africa of Africans demanding a different relation with France, an end to neocolonialism. And I wonder, from the point of view of your party, what you view that sort of relationship to be. What could a new relationship between France and Africa look like?
Well, firstly, I must say that 1 year ago I was in Dakar, and this year the atmosphere is completely different because in Dakar they live freedom, political freedom, because the repression was very, very harsh in Dakar against the PASTEF who invited us. La France Insoumise think that we have to respect the national sovereignty of the people. The France Insoumise thinks we must not be the partner, the follower of the United States. The France Insoumise thinks that the majority of the world is not satisfied by the way the world is led by the United States, for example. And we praise solidarity between the people. We praise for equal relation for trade, for example. That's what we do. And I think we have to respect we have to be respectful of our mutual differences, and we must build bridges when we know we can be okay on some policies, but we must respect what the people has decided, and that's the problem in France, that we have a complicated history with Africa, because there is colonization, and because there are in France a lot of people who are from this colonization. I'm French, but I was born in Congo, Republic of Congo, and my parents were born during the colonization. So it's like it's a unique history in Western Europe, and there in France they are again on former lectures, not a modern lecture of the situation, because now in Africa, in a lot of countries, people know their right, people know where they want to go, and people know where they don't want to go.
I want to ask you about the issue that has been dominating headlines for the last 8 months, and that is the horrific atrocities being committed in Gaza. And your party, LFI, has been very active in demanding a ceasefire and generally, more just policies towards Palestinians, as well as calling for serious moves towards peace in Ukraine. Do the European elections and the upcoming French elections offer an opportunity for a change in direction of the foreign policy trajectory in Europe?
Well, the situation in Gaza was and is still a major subject for the election. We have elections coming soon. And in fact, we talked a lot of Gaza because others didn't want to talk about Gaza. That's the point. We don't talk about Gaza more than it should be. We talk about Gaza because it's the first genocide in the 21st century. The first. And the majority of the countries, of the people of this world, are shocked by what is happening. And Israel is sustained by my country because, France governments always say we want a ceasefire, we want to liberate the hostages, we want 2 states. But what do they do? Because they are in the the United Nations. France has a great place. What does France do? Nothing. And the comparison with Ukraine is not fair because for Russia, everybody in the world condemns Russia. Everybody condemns Russia, and the difference is that Israel is not so condemned. So it's hypocrisy. This comparison is hypocrisy, and we are very proud to have in our elected members of the European Parliament, Rima Hassan, who was very, I think we can say, the revelation, the star of this campaign, and I think we can also thank Jean-Luc Mélenchon because he never stopped. He never stopped telling the words of international laws. Now, the United Nations, the CPI, say what we say for 8 months now. So I think now there's an issue for the elections coming. We should not go backwards on this issue. We are together with other French left parties, but we must not go backwards.
Well, we are going to be looking with great interest at the upcoming elections here in France. We'll certainly be following you, as will all our followers, to see how you all do in LFI. But Nadège Abomangoli, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I think it's so important that we don't let the narrative be totally dominated by the idea that the far right made gains, which they did. I mean, there's no question. But when it comes to France specifically, there does seem to be a chance for the left. And I'm sure, I mean, there was that viral Twitter thread going around. Maybe you saw it today about just the complete soap opera taking place, or maybe soap opera is not the right word. It's like a thriller about the sort of ridiculousness of the French right at the moment.
Yeah. The head of the Republicans, which is like the mainstream right-wing party, the head of it, actually, they tried to remove him because he said we should work with Marine Le Pen. And so the other people in the party were like, we got to get this guy out. So he just locks the door to the headquarters and is like, okay, well, then I'm like, we're not going to do anything. And then they had some people do a press conference in front. They were like, we're going to call basically the French equivalent of 911 to kick down the door. And then somebody showed up who had a key.
Someone had a spare key, I thought.
Someone did subsequently come with the spare key and emerged out of nowhere. There's a lot of memes. The best one I think I've seen so far is the last scene of Scarface, where they come in there to kill him in his mansion, and it's like the head of the party, like trying to maintain himself in there. But yeah, it's an amazing situation, and it says so much. And I agree with you for sure. Having not allowing the narratives to be totally overtaken. I mean, they gained 1 million votes, they gained 4 seats, and on a very strong, clearly left-wing platform. People were killing them going into the thing because they said, oh, why don't you unite with all these other groups? But they didn't want to unite with them because they said they don't really represent any legitimate change, and people in France are looking for change. And I think, Nadège, who you've seen, Danielle Obono, Rima Hassan, who is mentioned, who's Algerian, it's also representing whole sectors of France that are totally unrepresented in the political situation before. Their meetings were being banned because of the statements they were making on Gaza. They were trying to have meetings in different places, and local mayors were banning them, saying that they're anti-Semitic. And now Macron has said the same thing. It's calling on people to unite against him, to be against the bigotry of the far right and the anti-Semitism of the far left, which is amazing because the National Rally is like a party formed by a former SS member and, longtime fascist. So it's like so bizarre on so many different levels. But yeah, there's some interesting pieces. The Workers' Party of Belgium, another left-wing party, the second largest party in Antwerp, I think the third largest party in Brussels. So they had a good election as well. So even though there was some negativity all around the continent, Denmark also saw some good results for the left. Our friend Savim Dagdalen, who people, have seen on this show many times, her party, BSW, did, relatively well where they thought they'd be in the polls, but better than most of the other so-called left-wing parties. So to me, Rania, it seems like what we're seeing is, those who are Get ready to go to our second guest here now. But those who are, speaking out more forcefully around the contradictions that are facing working people and others in Europe are doing well. And in places where they aren't, the right wing is taking advantage. But let's move forward here. We want to talk about another very important win for working class people that's here in the United States. Waffle House, people may have seen, has agreed to raise their wages. We'll find out more about that. But of course, all of this is happening because a lot of workers at Waffle House have been standing up and walking out to demand better working conditions and wages. And we are very, very honored to be joined by one of those workers, Naomi Harris, who's a Waffle House server from Columbia, South Carolina, and also a co-founding member of the Union of Southern Service Workers. Naomi, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hi.
Well, it's always great to have you with us, and I like to think everyone has heard of everything, but for those who maybe haven't heard, what happened, what has Waffle House agreed to in terms of, raising wages?
So, Waffle House has now agreed to give a 300% increase with our wages because all of us going on strike and everything. And so it really shows us how raising our workplaces, standing up for our voices, it really works in a way.
Oh, let's see what we can do here. We may have lost Naomi there. She froze. We'll see if we can get her back. Important issue. 300% increase in wages in Waffle House workers because, they fought and won. I mean, it's honestly pretty amazing. The one crazy thing about it, Rania, I'm waiting to hear from our team if we might be able to figure this out while we wait, is the CEO of Waffle House, when contacted by Associated Press, there's a video of him announcing that they're increasing wages. And AP contacts him to say, like, what's going on. They actually, he refused to comment. He refused to comment on raising wages. I've never heard of a corporation be like, oh, yeah, no, we are a really bad employer and we're not raising our wages. But, excuse me, I think the reason why is he probably knew that the follow-up question was going to be, is this because workers were organizing and walking out? And I think he did not want to answer that one, truthfully to the Associated Press.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But also, this has been an ongoing struggle. I mean, we have been covering this. We've had people who are involved in activism around this on the show over the last, I want to say, even more than a year. Right.
Yeah.
I know you follow the labor struggle in the U.S. a lot more closely than I do, but there's been a lot of hard work put into this. A lot of struggle, and it's huge because
excuse me,
Waffle House workers have been subjected to some really horrific conditions. And hopefully this will help, if not rectify some of those conditions, at least lead a pathway, not just to a pay raise, but more than that.
Yeah, and they pledge to keep fighting, but people walking out and, it's like this, they have no protections. They can be fired on the spot, in a lot of these places, especially in the deep south. So it takes a lot of courage to do what these workers have done by standing up. And, they're not covering their faces. They're not blurring their voices. Like, they're putting themselves out on Front Street and telling the company, like, hey, we're not going to take this anymore. And I think it's pretty exciting. I know that they're also going to have, like, seniority elements to this. So people who've been there for a long time are going to then have the opportunity to make significantly more money, bonuses, things like that. So obviously, all that work was happening, and it captured, I think, such an imagination. I mean, look, I'm from Virginia. You're from close to Virginia. Waffle House is like an iconic brand, in the South especially. Everybody knows Waffle House. Everyone goes to Waffle House. Unfortunately, it's gotten kind of a memification status because some of these fights that have happened in Waffle House, which, people joke about, but it's not a joke for, the workers there. People have been threatened, had almost gotten shot, all those kind of things. But nonetheless, like, it's a brand that everybody knows. And it's just pretty rare that, big brands this day and age, not 1937, when U.S. Steel and General Motors are being unionized, that these major brands are. Okay, it seems like Naomi is in a bad spot in terms of service. So we'll swing back to that story. We'll definitely make sure we cover this story. But yeah, 300% increase in wages, seniority bonuses for more or less, different things like that, different other progressions. Hopefully they'll do more. The other thing some of the workers were asking for was air conditioning. A lot of these places don't have good air conditioning. And of course, you can imagine it's a restaurant. It gets hot. You're in the South. in the middle of the summer. There's obvious, like, basically, sweatshop style conditions, other things like that, protections around safety and other pieces like that. So, they'll have to continue to push and continue to organize. But I think, it's a pretty exciting piece and a pretty exciting win. And it goes with, the Volkswagen workers in Tennessee and, a lot of different things we're seeing now. The Starbucks workers, who also, I think actually the Supreme Court had sort of a negative opinion, I believe, on the National Labor Relations Board in relationship to that. But nonetheless, we're continuing to see, all these unions. And on top of that, Rania, I'll just add, we're continuing to see a lot of unions in the United States speak out on other issues, on the issues of Palestine, for instance. I mean, USSW, the Union of Southern Service Workers, on their May Day rally that they did this year, they actually marched to the encampment there at, I believe it was Duke, maybe, to show solidarity, with those who were in the student encampment in solidarity with Palestine. So, like, that's the story you don't see, like you hear all about these encampments, these students, whatever, and Duke, it's an elite university, you hear about that. But they don't put the story on the front page of the New York Times about the low-wage workers working at Waffle House and Dollar Tree and, Red Roof Inn and all these other people who took time out of their day on May 1st demonstrating for workers' rights to make sure that they were showing solidarity, with those who were there in the encampment in their same city,
No, it's beautiful, and I certainly hope that they tuned into. I know this is a pivot, but I'm just thinking about the fact that
Please.
Congresswoman AOC did that special show on anti-Semitism with those two very Zionist women. Basically trying to smear the progressive left as having an anti-Semitism problem and playing into that whole narrative. I think that would have, look, I actually don't know where AOC stands on the union stuff. Maybe I assume this is something that she would support.
Yeah,
actually.
He maybe has already, who knows?
But at the same time, I'm just so stunned. Like, why not give attention to something like this instead of capitulating to people who are essentially trying to justify or sugarcoat a genocide.
Yeah.
And
go
shout
ahead.
down the left about their apparent anti-Semitism, which, the left does more than any other group of people in the country to make sure that they're not being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Unlike the far right and the right, and even liberals with the way they basically conflate Zionism with Judaism. I mean, that's anti-Semitic in and of itself. And just to have somebody who apparently ran for Congress to be this maverick, lefty, spend her time doing that was so disgusting to watch.
Yeah. I mean, the number one supporters of Israel outside of, let's say non-Jewish Zionists, and of course there's not a equal sign there. Many, many Jewish people who are against Zionism and standing up against the genocide. But outside of those who are in the Jewish community who do support Israel, the biggest supporters are Christian Zionists, whose entire belief is that when Jesus comes back, that all of the Jews will be murdered. So, I mean, this is actually intense anti-Semitism and mass murderous stuff that, because of their various religious beliefs, they want to be with Israel now. But, they're never questioned on their anti-Semitism. And I think it's important to note here, there's no problem with bringing to the attention of people the importance of standing up against anti-Semitism, but that's not actually what was being discussed in the seminar with AOC. I mean, they said that BDS was anti-Semitic, by the way. Many other things. I wish I had it in front of me right now. But the basic point being, this is exactly what they did to Jeremy Corbyn, where they actually identify basically all support for the Palestinians as essentially anti-Semitic. And the only way to not be anti-Semitic is essentially not to support the Palestinian people. And undoubtedly, there are anti-Semites that are trying to use this moment to capitalize on this genocide to push their narrative. No one's denying that. It's obvious that it's out there. Anyone who's on the internet can see it. It's very concerning and very distressing, and it's very upsetting. But the thing that is driving it is not the left in the United States. The thing that is driving it is Israel's genocidal policy, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. That is, and not only that, but then the outrageous attempts to prevent people from speaking out against this genocide and the smear campaigns against them that have created an open door for actual Nazis and anti-Semites to step into the portray here and to try to say, see, we always told you, and this is that. And since people have kind of hardened their hearts having seen these terrible situations, it makes a lot of people vulnerable to those types of views. But instead of having that conversation, they spend the whole time trying to pick out one or two random people here, there, and everywhere. And, look, who knows who some of these people are? Some of them are probably misguided people who are showing up to demonstrations who, are just dumb. I mean, we can admit that. We've all been to many demonstrations where you're wondering who would bring that sign, who would do that, who would look like this. Is ridiculous. There's that element. Some of these people, honestly, I'm just going to be frank, might be even provocateurs. They're coming in, they're not showing their face. Who knows who they are? And then all of a sudden but instead of the broad majority of the people who are there, who have no anti-Semitic views whatsoever, all the speakers who are not anti-Semitic whatsoever, they just pick out that one person in a crowd of 20,000. And then they say that anyone who has solidarity with the Palestinian people's right to resist is anti-Semitic. And that is not true. Now, you could say, I'm against that. Anyone has the right to say they're against that. You could say, I'm for nonviolence, I'm for this, I'm for that. Okay, you have that right. But to say that it's anti-Semitic to support the Palestinian resistance is completely and totally absurd. There's no equal sign between them. So it's an attempt to blur this line. One, to suggest that all Jews are in favor of Zionism, which is obviously not true, and many of the strongest voices in the U.S. are Jewish against the genocide, and then to say that supporting the right to resist, which is a right in the United Nations, like an international law, it's not like some crazy thing, is in and of itself anti-Semitic, and then to suggest that Israel and the Zionist attempt to quiet down criticism is necessarily anti-Semitic. Like those three things, it's not there. But this was the thrust and the nature of, this so-called seminar that AOC held, and that is being pushed by many people all across the country. And it's really reprehensible, and it's confusing too many issues. And it's actually opening the door to the real Nazis and the real anti-Semites. Like, that's the thing I think we need to keep coming home here is like, this is actually helping those people by making non-anti-Semitic criticism of Israel, together with it. It actually makes it easier for the anti-Semites to find a space in the discourse.
Well, what's ironic about all that, and we're not going to get too into it now, but I do encourage people to keep their eye out for a forthcoming Dispatches episode about this particular phenomena. But the irony here is that the Zionist movement in and of itself allied with anti-Semites. Mm-hmm. There was collaboration with anti-Semites. And the Zionist movement, Zionism, like the vast majority of Jews were against it before the founding of Israel, yes. Before the creation of Israel, for many reasons. And a lot of that, of course, changed after the Holocaust. And there's, a lot of reasons why that changed. But that being said, the entire idea as Israel as a refuge for Jews is also based on a myth, like a complete myth. So it's all of this anti-Semitism talk is just weaponizing a really horrific history, and weaponizing a very serious issue to justify the existence of an ethno-state. And it's disgusting. And anyways, keep your eye out for that upcoming Dispatches episode. I am very excited about it. But ultimate irony, the people who are accusing the left, which is historically and presently the most active opponent of anti-Semitism, the people making those accusations are some of the biggest anti-Semites out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's really shocking, actually, turning the tables, and it's really just a shame, that these Israeli officials have been allowed to get away with this, unbelievable conflation of Zionism with Judaism, which is just not real. And yeah, it's a shame. So we have to continue to keep our antenna up, of course, because we have to watch out for those who are trying to use this for anti-Semitic purposes. But we have to stand up for the right of people to oppose this genocide, and honestly, to oppose the apartheid state of Israel, at the end of the day. And it's like that. It's not anti-Semitic to say that there should be one state with democratic rights for all peoples. Like, that's not anti-Semitic. I'm sorry. You don't have to agree with it, but it's not anti-Semitic. And people have to go beyond that. Like, just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that it's this other thing. And let's stay united on being against that. But unfortunately, not everyone is as principled, obviously, because why would you be principled if you're committing a genocide? You're going to do and say whatever you possibly can to, cover yourself, because you know how bad it really is. I mean, the official Israel Twitter account, I don't know if you've seen the thing they've been promoting, the ads that, civilians were involved in October 7th. So somehow
Ridiculous.
that like means that you should be okay with the bombing of civilians. I mean, it's really outrageous, actually, on so many different levels. But it just shows, the very narrow, thin moral reed that's about to break off that they're trying to stand on. That's just really unbelievable. But anyway, we'll leave that where it is for now. We'll come back to some of the issues regarding Gaza later, including countries cutting ties and also, companies cutting ties. We'll get to that maybe a little bit after our last guest. But we want to turn here now to a critically important issue that's not even close to as covered as it should be, especially vis-a-vis other conflicts around the world, and that is the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the ongoing humanitarian crisis and conflict continues. And anyway, let me not editorialize. We're going to get into all of that. We are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Akilimali Choma, who is a journalist covering the Democratic Republic of Congo and also Central Africa. Akilimali, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with this great television and this great program.
Well, it is our pleasure to have you here. And, I want to start with, the conflict in the East involving M23. It seems as if the fighting has been increasing, over the past month or so. So if you could maybe just give us a sense of, who is fighting over what in Eastern Congo?
Yes, giving you a fighting about what is going on here in DR Congo, you have to know, first of all, that it's M23, which is a movement supported by Rwanda, which is fighting in the east of DRC. And we have a situation which is worse. We have around 7 million of people who displaced from their villages and are now living in other places in the country. We have million others who are living in neighborhood countries and right now are in need of help. And the situation is really dark and really bad about what is going on. As you can see in those images, that the situation is really dark and really bad because the situation, those IDP people are living in bad condition in a bad area. Until now, the fighting continue to be between the Congolese army, FARDC, and we have some support of some local group which called Wazalendo, and we have also on heavy weapons some SADC force, which is the South African Development Economic Community, which is helping here. We have also somehow MONUSCO, which is not really involved in this fight, but which is doing some kind of things. I don't know exactly to explain you what, but who is here also on the ground in the east of DRC.
Yeah, I want you to talk, obviously, we're a bit more about what Rwanda's role is here. And of course, Rwanda being essentially a very close, some people might call even proxy of the West in the case of Congo. But I also wanted to ask you, and this is maybe like tangential, there was this apparent coup attempt earlier in May that took place that, got some attention, but then kind of fell out of the news. And I know there was a recent trial of some of the people who were involved in that. And I'm just curious if you can also elaborate a bit on that coup attempt and if it matters or if it's connected at all to everything else we're witnessing in the DRC at the moment.
That attempt didn't really change anything on the ground because you have to know, because there are also a U.S. citizen who were arrested in that kind of in that crew of Christian Malanga is a is a Congolese, is an American citizen, a Congolese from his parents and his origin, and he tried to put a kind of attempt and to stop the government of Kinshasa and trying to put a new movement, but his attempt didn't really succeed, and it seems like a kind of joke here locally, because the situation didn't change anymore at on the ground, and they didn't really take a big part of the town Kinshasa, the capital city of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right now, Christian Malanga died in the response of the Congolese army until now, and we have also last Friday we had the beginning of the trial of those people, and until now we are still waiting for news from justice. And what was the motivation of Christian Malanga and his troop to do that attempt against the Tshisekedi regime?
I think one of the issues that people always, wonder a lot about in this context is obviously this part of the Congo in general is very mineral rich. And I think many wonder what is the connection between, the mining for these minerals and the conflict that is going on. And I wonder what you think about the connection between the conflict and the mineral wealth of the DRC.
Yes, because the DRC and the mineral, it's the same thing, and it can't be disconnected, because all this war, which is organized here locally in Congo in the east, it organized exactly by some proxies which are using some neighborhood country like Rwanda or Uganda to organize fight here, and to take resources, because they know that organizing. We have the region of the east of DRC, which is rich with the important mineral, which is the coltan, and the coltan is what is using to do, for example, our life, because we are using computer, we are also using telephone, we are also using our things, and this is an important mineral for the new technology. And you have to know that more than 50% of the world reserve of coltan is still in Congo, and most of it's in the east of DRC. That's why many countries, I can say, including countries like US, which is which is leading the market, because you have to know that you have two of big companies of telecommunication which are staying, and which have their headquarters and their offices in US, and this is very, very important, and they are using all those proxy to say we have to take these minerals, and we have to steal these minerals, and they really don't care about what is going on, about people who are bombing by the M23, which is a proxy of Rwanda, proxy of those companies and those countries. They don't care about the humanity situation, which is really worse and really dangerous, and they don't care about children who are working, children and women who are working in those minerals, and they haven't money, and they haven't anything to do and anything to work with, and to help themselves to be insecure, and to have the better life. They can't have the telephone, for example, in the country which are giving to all the world the possibility to use telephone and computer, and they can't have even possibility to be educated and to go to school because the security situation, firstly, is dangerous, is very worse, and secondly, is that they have no infrastructure, they have no books, they have no materials to be educated, to be informed, to be trained to the world challenges, and to respond and to give to Congolese response. So anything in Congo, it's matter of its resources, and anyone who will tell you something else will lie for sure.
When we talk about, there's so much happening in Africa, particularly West Africa, over the last more than a year at this point. And I'm just curious if any of that has influenced the conversation in a place like the DRC. The fact that you have these countries in West Africa, which aren't that far away, that have, taken on a very anti-imperialist tone, have kicked out the French. You've got countries talking about kicking out the Americans, like Niger. And I'm just curious if any of that, I know the DRC is dealing with its own, internal strife and violence and the situation with Rwanda, but has any of that news, any of those developments impacted the conversation or any of the movements that exist in the DRC?
A big movement, I can't say that, no, not a big movement like in those countries, but there is a big discussion between Congolese, and there is small movement which are now, I can say, some of it are now saying that we have to stop the imperialism of the Western countries, and they are using some fact because for example, the war in the east of DRC is I can say 90% supported by Western countries, which are using those resources, even if some of their industry are in China or whatever else. It's the issue of the democracy. It's the issue of the possibility, but it's in a big discussion. It's a big discussion which is happening here, not only in Congo but in Central Africa region, because you are saying about issue of West African, but we have also some country in Central Africa, like Central Africa Republic, which is really in discussion, and which is really discussing about the possibility to leave Western country and Western system. It's also using some fact, like we are using the Western system now. All the Africa, we can say that we are using that system. First of all, French countries. Now we have 50 years, around 50 years per country, because the independence happening around 50 or 60 years, around 50 or 60 years, and until now we have no development. We have no democracy, which were really expected. We have so many things, and we have also many countries which are involving in many conflict, and which are supporting many rebel group, like here in DRC. We have also some misinformation about what is going on in some country, and we have also some rumors that, for example, that some country are supporting terrorism, like in Mali, because I were there a few weeks later, and this is also happening, and this is growing, and the situation of the M23 is growing. That point of view that we have to leave this Western system, because it's not really helping the country, and it's not really helping African in general and Congolese in particular.
Well, a lot to follow here and a lot to keep covering, and we will keep following and we will keep covering, and we're very happy to have your assistance as we do this. Akili Mali Choma Choma, journalist covering DRC and Central Africa. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much, and have a good show.
Rania?
Well, I mean, that's, I'm glad that we continue to cover the DRC because it often gets left out of the media. And as I often say, I mean, as I say, like so many of these conflicts, these wars over, with the West trying to like just essentially rape Africa for resources, get covered in the mainstream media when they do receive attention in the most ridiculous and racist ways, where it's just like, oh, those Black people just can't get it together. They're just killing each other. They're still killing each other, like with no context. Not, like literally, it'll just be like, oh, another 80 people were killed in some part of Congo today because Black people just kill each other in Africa. That's essentially how it gets covered in mainstream media outlets. And it's a way to, confuse the public into just thinking that Africa is this chaotic continent with constant war. The most you'll get is maybe the resource curse. Right? There's just this curse when you have resources. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But it's just, and Congo is the perfect example because it's never, ever put into the context of there's Western corporations that are literally just stealing the most important resources in the world.
Yeah. No, it's a terrible situation and on so many different fronts. We'll keep covering it. And I can promise you this, Breakthrough News fans, we're going to do even more than you might expect to cover the Congo this year. That's all I'm going to say about that. But we're not going to let this go, and we're gonna do some things that I think are going to shine some spotlight on some very interesting aspects of the struggle there. So keep watching, keep following for Congo and more. And shout out to Akili Mali, who's a great journalist, many great journalists on the ground there in DRC, mainly working in French, but doing great work at the coalface there in eastern and southeastern Congo. We're going to move forward here to another very crucial part of the world, crucial conversation, and that is the aftershocks, perhaps you could say, of the elections in India that I'm sure many people saw at least some headlines from, and we're going to dig into many of the things around what took place there, and we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Suchitra Vijayan, who's an author, lawyer, and founder and director of the Polis Project. Suchitra, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And I guess my first question is, obviously Mr. Modi has come back as prime minister, but with a much reduced majority for his party. What is behind, his the underperforming perhaps the expectations that many people had for Modi and the BJP in this election?
I think this was the result that many people expected in 2019. I think we have to understand that the 2019 election results, people actually expected Modi to get a much lower polling numbers, but then they won in a landslide. I think what we've seen is in the last 10 years, the biggest issue right now is the money. The economy is not doing as well. There is, of course, rampant inequality. During the last decade, the top 1% of India's wealthy have gotten richer. Of course, there is violence on the ground. And of course, we have to remember that Modi's regime has focused disproportionately on hate speech and just creating a climate of the kind of hate politics that is really targeted towards the country's Muslim population. Of course, their politics also disproportionately targets Dalits, Muslims, and Adivasis. So what you've really seen here is a decade of a specter state. Like, this is a theater state that really did not deliver or perform in any aspect. And I think on the reality on the ground, I think people really felt that. And I think we have to remember that India's rural population is the one that really came out and voted against Modi. And if you look at the breakdown of the votes, the urban sector, India's already successful, the beneficiaries of Modi's politics, who happen to be India's top 1%, have continued to vote for Modi. But it's the rural sector that's really gone against him.
Well, on the other side of that, I mean, the center-left alliance increased its coalition seats by quite a bit, and some of those seats did go to left parties. So I'm curious if you can talk a bit about the left gains, the coalition itself, but also specifically the leftists who gained seats.
I think we really have to credit India's social justice movements. The reason the left or the broad left, which is anywhere between liberal and left, vote gain is really the result of activists on the ground who know the people, who really went above and beyond to mobilize and organize. And also, I think people forget that while India is called the world's largest democracy, it's been incredibly difficult to do any work in India. This was not a free and fair election. We have to understand that every institution in India, from the Election Commission to the police to the judiciary, have all become an extended arm of the Indian state. There were serious issues with election violations. Certain places saw vote rigging. So despite the immense power and this not being a free and fair elections, BJP could not win the expected seats. And that's purely because of the work that was done on the ground level. I think a lot of the liberal to left parties or the opposition parties, I think the right way to call them is the opposition parties, kind of understood that they have to listen to the people, that a platform that prioritized social justice, a platform that really put women in front and center, really just gave voice to local leaders is what really mobilized this. So I would say the victory really is the victory of local resistance groups, not resistance groups, the local organizers and movement folks who really just did all of the work. And I think that's where the real victory, at least according to me, stands.
No, I think it's an important point, and I guess it leads me to some other issues. I mean, this is the mainstream press keeps saying we're going to see a changed Modi. It's going to be very different. It's going to be a whole new world. I mean, I wonder what you think about that around some of the core issues. I mean, the hatred against Muslims, the issues involving Kashmir, other things like that. Are you expecting that having a smaller majority will provoke any change, or perhaps maybe they'll just be less verbose about doing the exact same agenda?
I think it's very important for us to understand that this was the exact same argument that some of India's most liberal intellectuals put forth when Modi won for the first time. And it was the same argument that they said in 2019. They said that the political power will make Modi more moderate, and that hasn't happened. I think what I fear is that Modi is going to become more vicious simply because there's nothing more dangerous than a fascist who's lost his power. I think they are going to try and tame and discipline the people who have resisted against them. So I don't see Modi changing his tune. If anything, I have a feeling that he is going to become more vindictive, and I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Having said that, I think for the first time, we have an opposition, which means it's going to be hard for them to really push through the kind of illegal, unconstitutional laws that they have kind of pushed through. A good example is the ways in which that they have made the already draconian sedition laws and other laws far more draconian. The right to habeas corpus in India is almost watered down now. So I think all of that has already been passed. Those laws are already incredibly dangerous and give the Modi government immense power over the bodies of its citizens. So I think it is good to see a parliament in which it's going to be harder for them to pass the laws as they did before. But I think it's great. And I think we should not be, I think we should be vigilant. And I think it's important for us to understand that Modi is never going to become moderate. And I think that would be a very false assessment.
And I'm curious, will this have any impact on foreign policy? So just like to zoom out from just the domestic and India's relations with its neighbors and I guess, with the world, its role. I mean, it's even under Modi, it's been kind of taking this role of joining global South countries when it comes to certain issues. So I'm curious if you think that'll change at all under this slightly changed government.
I don't know. I think you have to understand that Mr. Jaishankar, who has been the man who has spearheaded this, has been incredibly aggressive. The kind of diplomatic gains that India did have over the years have all been lost. I think people remember when the last time Bernie Sanders actually challenged India's position and called out India's position on its rights violations against Muslims. Jaishankar actually threw a temper tantrum and refused to meet American senators. Another thing we have to also understand is that Biden has been writing blank checks to India. They see India as an incredibly important ally because it's a large market. And I think they kept pandering over and over again. And they have done that with Modi simply because of the market opportunities it does. But I think there is more discomfort in South Asia because India's neighbors are increasingly getting fed up with India's more right-wing positions. And I think globally, in terms of foreign policy, India has lost most of its gains within South Asia itself. But I don't see much changing within foreign policy, given that I think Biden administration or any administration that comes next has already knows how to get the most out of Modi. Flatter the man and he will give you anything. And I think that is still going to continue.
Mm-hmm. And, specifically on a similar point, I mean, I wonder vis-a-vis Israel, what you expect to see here. Obviously, Modi has made getting close to Netanyahu one of his kind of trademarks here, and, coming back into power. I mean, maybe just give some context, perhaps, for those who don't know, of what the relationship between Israel and India has been. But if you see any change there or, sort of a doubling down again on the same policies.
I think under Modi, I think the Israel-India relationship has gotten incredibly strong. There was always an India-Israel connection. Azad Issa has a brilliant book that kind of maps the history of this, and I would really suggest that book to anyone who is interested in the more historical relationship. But what we've seen under Modi is really a deepening of the military-industrial complex. A lesser-known information that a lot of people should be worried about is that when Modi came to power in 2019, he pretty much offered up the biometric data of all of India's citizens to Israel to run their own tests. So Israel already has access to India's biometric data that the government owns. I'm always surprised that this information is never really quite debated. Another thing you see is that we know that for quite some time, Israeli IOF soldiers have been training Indian soldiers and cops. You see the port of Haifa, which is now owned by Adani. Again, just yesterday, a well-known right-wing Indian journalist and a pundit clearly said in their own podcast that India should be implementing Israel-like policies in Kashmir, clearly calling for a similar settlement-like building. So what you're really seeing is India wanting to replicate what Israel has done to the Palestinians in terms of the demolition of houses. Again, India has seen a race in the demolition of houses, Muslim houses especially. You see, again, the sharing of technology. You see the ways in which surveillance is used to profile Muslims in India. So what I really see is India wanting to increasingly emulate Israel, but also India is the only country that has agreed to send laborers to Israel since October 7th. And again, these are indentured laborers for all purposes. So again, sending your own citizens to an active I mean, this is not a war, but still, here you have the occupation of the Palestinian people. You have over 40,000 at this point in time, more than 50,000 people killed. And India is still willing to send its own people to go work in West Bank and occupied territories. So what you're really seeing is using Israel's model and replicating it. India's used surveillance technology from Israel to target. I mean, this could be I could spend the next 2 hours telling you how Israel is Israel is impacted and continues to impact the state of dissent and resistance in India. I think that is going to, again, I see more of a deepening of this relationship. And I don't like to be, I know everybody's really excited that Modi has come back to power with much less seats. But I also just want people to remember that this means that they are going to do things in a far more aggressive manner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I think that's a critically important point. Oh, sorry, Rania, I cut you off there.
Go ahead, Eugene.
Okay, sorry. No, I was just going to say I think it's a critically important point, and one will have to keep watching on a number of different fronts as we keep moving forward here. Obviously, a crucial country, and I'll just hope for the good things. And I think what we've seen from the farmers and the workers and the folks in Kashmir of standing up and pushing back has borne some fruit. So we'll hope for more in that direction. Suchitra Vijayan, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, Eugene, I mean, obviously, it's important, the elections in the European Union, but it's India is a massive country, yeah. Over 1 billion people. It's hugely important. It's strategically located in the world. It's a huge economy, and its elections matter. And this was a huge shift.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what's happening. I think it was, heartening to see that they said they were going to get 400 seats, which was shocking. But, to see a little bit of humbling there. But yes, much more work to be done. But it really is honestly quite amazing what, social movements and others have done and held up against and stood up against, and people going to jail, being killed, being murdered. It really is just amazing that they've been able to, deliver these sorts of victories. So, things we're going to have to keep watching. Yeah, and India is crucial. The way India, in a way, it's not talked about as much as China in this way, but what happens in India will, I think, have a big impact on the whole world, in the latter half of this century. So we'll keep watching, we'll keep following. We want to move forward here to another very important issue, and that is the relationship of Israel and Latin America, which has been taking some hits as many Latin American nations have been fed up with what we've seen in terms of the genocide there in Gaza, especially Colombia, as you can see there at the bottom of the screen. So before I say too much, we'll just get right to the chase here. We are very happy to be joined to discuss all of this by Zoe Alexandra, who's a journalist and co-editor of People's Dispatch. Zoe, thank you so much for being with us. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, Zoe, we can't hear you.
We're gonna have to bring her back on. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't surprised that this was gonna happen. No names are gonna be said, but someone on our Breakthrough News team was like, "Oh, I bet you someone's gonna be muted." And I said, "Wow, what a way to start the show!" And here you go. Bad karma.
I guess
so.
Oh, man. Someone's getting punished.
Yeah. Wait until this show is over.
I don't know how.
Yeah.
Wait until the show.
Know who you are. You know who you are behind the scenes there.
Oh, God. It's not me, by the
okay.
way, you guys. Not me. But I suggest, is she back? Do we have Zoe back?
I think she is ready. Zoe?
Whoa.
Let's see if this works.
You're there.
Woo,
it worked.
We can hear you.
Listen.
Wow, we're back together again.
Yeah, we are back together again. Thanks so much for joining. Let's start here. I think there's a lot of things that can be said, but let's start here with Colombia, which, of course, the president there of Colombia has been making many statements against the genocide, but just took some important economic action as well vis-a-vis Colombia's trade with Israel. So if you could maybe enlighten us to what's taking place there.
Yeah, this past week, President Gustavo Petro announced a decree from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Tourism saying that Colombia, due to, for example, the ruling of the ICJ, due to the warrants issued by the ICC and the different considerations by different UN bodies about Israel's actions in Gaza, the Republic of Colombia decided to suspend and ban coal exports to Israel. This is extremely significant as it's a very strong material deterrent to Israel. It's important to know that this is not, an easy decision for Colombia to make. Immediately after publishing this decree, he received all sorts of backlash, of course, from Israel. That's to be expected, but even internally from the Colombian Mining Association, which issued a very, very sharp kind of condemnation of what Petro did, and saying that, this is going to hurt actually the poor and oppressed communities in Colombia, and this goes against different agreements that Colombia has with Israel. Important to note that in 2014, Colombia signed a free trade agreement with Israel. This is, of course, under a right-wing government. The National Federation of Coal Producers also released a statement immediately saying that this would only hurt Colombia and the Colombian people, and this was a horrible decision. But again, this is coming off of 8 months of course, the genocide, and Gustavo Petro being one of the world leaders in condemning what's happening in Gaza, condemning the Israeli government, going so far as to compare, the Israeli government to Nazi Germany, all of these sorts of things, which has earned it a lot of, pushback from some of its key allies. But again, a truly historic move that I think in terms of other countries taking similar moves, I think we've only really seen such strong and concrete moves by Turkey.
So I want to, before we zoom out on the region, Zoe, I want to like, I just want you to give a very brief background to why this is such a big deal specifically for Colombia. I mean, obviously Colombia has a new leader. Well, I guess not too new anymore, but a newer leader who is progressive. But before this, Colombia was under basically like right-wing dictatorship after right-wing dictatorship for quite some time, and even would like brag about itself as being the Israel of Latin America, was essentially like a proxy for the Americans. And it was one thing when Gustavo Petro was rhetorically going against Israel, calling this a genocide in the very beginning back in October, November, December. But this is a very material stance to take that is going to impact both Israel and, like you mentioned, Colombia. So I just want you to give a little bit of a brief, I guess, background or to the significance of the fact that it is Colombia of all countries that is the one taking this step.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because of its historic position in relation to the U.S. and because Colombia, under kind of this, as you said, this right-wing dictator, sort of a democratically elected dictatorship of the ruling class, Colombia's natural resources have always been at the service of transnational companies, at the service of the U.S. So actually, it's the fifth largest producer of coal in the world, and this coal is all produced by a U.S. company, Drummond, which some people may have heard of, and a subsidiary of the Swiss company, Glencore. So important to note, neither of these are state companies. So first of all of the coal that's being produced in Colombia, which by the way is produced in one of the most impoverished regions of Colombia, which is, this coal extraction has completely devastated the region. So that's all there on the area of kind of this environmental level, the fact that actually these coal companies and the fact that that Colombia is such a big coal producer is already indicative of Colombia's position kind of in the global capitalist economy of always being subordinated to the United States and to the global north as sort of the raw materials supplier. Colombia is one of the most wealthy countries in natural resources, but has been so impoverished because of this right-wing rule. So of course, banning coal exports to Israel is not necessarily saying we're going to nationalize the coal companies, which of course would probably be a little too severe for the moment for Gustavo Petro's government and where it finds itself. But it is a very strong signal, not only to the US government, not only to Israel, but also to these transnational corporations of reasserting Colombia's sovereignty and saying, we do not agree with your foreign policy, the foreign policy of the United States that gives unconditional support to Israel, which is complicit in genocide, which is furthering genocide. And we, even though we're still sort of under this control of these transnational companies, we're actually going to assert our sovereignty and say Colombian coal is not going to fuel the genocide. So I think this is such a strong move, and really, again, is part of Gustavo Petro's policy of trying to actually, make policy decisions in favor of the Colombian people. Of course, Gustavo Petro, just as a side note, has been really pushing like transition away from coal, from oil, which have been Colombia's traditional sources of revenue, and trying to expand into green energy, trying to boost up agricultural production in the country. So this is interesting because it also kind of falls in line with the general push away from this extractive economy that's, of course, devastating the environment in Colombia, and this push towards a more holistic economy and in line with human rights, not just in Colombia, but of course, where these are being shipped to, and not being complicit in more human rights violations. And we know that Gustavo Petro drew so many comparisons between how the Colombian people have suffered under, of course, the U.S.-backed war on drugs that took place in Colombia, this U.S.-backed war against the left-wing guerrilla groups in the country. He's drawn so many, comparisons to these two. So I think it's both a very political and economic position, but of course, one that he holds very close to his heart.
Well, another president in Latin America who's made some tough statements, and similar to Gustavo Petro with, comparison of the genocide happening in Gaza now to the Nazis, is President Lula Ignacio da Silva of Brazil. So some tough statements there. I think there's been some diplomatic moves. What's been happening on that front regarding Latin America-Israel relations, the Brazil front, that is?
Yeah, well, we've seen kind of a tremendous evolution of Lula's position with regards to Israel. His first statement, not really where most people wanted it to be. But since then, he's really, really moved his position to support the Palestinian people, condemn Israel. This, I just want to point out, is sort of in line with Lula and his political background, how he's acted, in other situations, in terms of really being on the side of humanity in this broad sense. He has even tried to kind of play a leadership role in terms of mediation, which we know he also tried to do with the war in Ukraine. He's someone who wants to solve the problems and make things better. And so he's really, tried to use all of those diplomatic tools. He went and greeted the Brazilian sort of people who were trapped in Gaza. There were some Palestinian Brazilian families who were evacuated when the border with Rafah was closed, and there had to be this very intense negotiation. And again, recently Lula, I think he recalled the ambassador. There has been a huge push for the past 8 months for Lula actually take a step further and suspend diplomatic relations. So important to point out is that Gustavo Petro this week, said they were going to suspend coal exports. And just a month prior, so the beginning of May, is when he said that diplomatic relations would be completely broken. And so I think it was 1 month into the genocide, Petro said that he was recalling his ambassador. This is not suspending ties. This is just saying that we're not going to have someone stationed there. It's sort of like a step in that direction. Brazil has now done that. It's issued these strong statements, but it hasn't taken the step which countries like Bolivia and now Colombia has done, which Turkey again has done, and other countries, of saying we are completely suspending diplomatic ties. And, different Brazilian analysts have pointed out that this isn't so surprising because the tradition of Brazilian foreign policy is one of kind of a conciliatory approach of maintaining ties, of having this sort of neutral position, so to speak, of reciprocity. And so actually for Brazil and for Lula to take that step to suspend the diplomatic ties would be actually extremely strong. It would actually send a very strong message because of how it acts on the international scene, because of the mediator role, of course, Lula has played historically, because of the position Brazil does play. But it hasn't taken that step. And important to point out, Brazil is, of course, the largest economy in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it exports over $1 billion worth of crude oil to Israel. And so when we're talking about Colombia suspending coal shipments, we have to remember that Israel is not energy sovereign. It is one of the things that it tries to greenwash to the world is that it's innovating green technology and green energy. This is largely because the country itself does not have energy reserves. It does not have oil, despite its neighbors all having that. They did discover some gas, but again, it's not enough to actually sustain the country. So they've tried to kind of create these other sources of energy, but it's still, of course, dependent on fossil fuels. So Colombia, being one of the largest suppliers of coal to Israel, is a huge hit. That's definitely one of its backups. It only, I think, accounts for 1/5 of its energy consumption at the moment. But again, if all of your other energy sources go wrong, fossil fuels are the reliable backup. And so actually Brazil's $1 billion worth of crude petroleum that's exported to Israel would have a huge impact. And so that's driving a lot of this demand between suspending diplomatic ties and actually taking this step to have this economic impact on Israel and make it unable for it to be able to continue with the status quo.
Zoe, I know Latin America is very large. However, and you can't, say one thing, how some people feel in Brazil is the same how they feel in Colombia or Argentina, for example. But I'm curious, I am going to ask you to generalize for a moment. What's the general vibe when it comes to Israel across Latin America? And you could even split it up by certain countries if you'd like to. But obviously, all around the world, Israel's turning into this pariah state, especially when it comes to how people on the ground feel. And so I imagine in Latin America, that's very much the case, because in the global South, generally speaking, with a few exceptions here and there, people tend to sympathize more with Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the major outlier of just the one Milei who bizarrely converted to Judaism and is now like Israel's biggest fan. But he has a lot of other weird things going for him, and he's completely against his own people. So I don't think he really counts in this calculation. But, generally, I think it's a sentiment of disgust, of complete rejection, because what people are seeing on the news, either way, is that, 40,000 people have been massacred, that over 10,000 children have been killed. I think the broad sentiment is one of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Of course, Latin America and the Caribbean is a continent that has a history of struggle, a history that's been resisting U.S. imperialism, of resisting the attempt of colonizing powers to control its economy, to control its culture, to control its political life. It would not be wrong to say that I think the majority of people, of course, identify with this sentiment of wanting sovereignty, wanting freedom. Of course, the case of Palestine is one of, atrocious, violent, horrific genocide and settler colonialism. And I think that moves people. They haven't been as indoctrinated as, for example, the United States, which has a huge, of course, historic campaign to win over people to the cause of Zionism. That hasn't existed as much in Latin America in the past, perhaps decade and a half, when Israel kind of shifted its focus to Latin America as a potential source of political, diplomatic support and an economic market in terms of imports, exports, which we can see with the signing of several free trade agreements, like the one I mentioned with Colombia in 2014. In the ends of the 2000s, Mercosur also signed a free trade agreement with Israel, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Mexico, and Panama. So there was sort of this shift, but the cultural kind of allegiance to Zionism does not exist. And so all people are seeing is that there's one occupying power massacring a people who are doing absolutely nothing. And that, of course, moves people. Mobilizations have gotten bigger. They have gotten with this demand to cut ties. So I think that we are seeing, as you're saying, across the global South, this broad sentiment of rejection to Israel that maybe they didn't have before because it wasn't as present and it wasn't, going across their TV screen. But now that they're seeing it, they're definitely questioning and rejecting what Israel's doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the best places to follow all of these details and more, of course, is peoplesdispatch.org, peoplesdispatch.org, the outlet of which you are the co-editor. Zoe Alexandra, as always, we appreciate you helping us sort through all of these various things and giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Oh, always love to hear from Zoe. She is very knowledgeable about all things Latin America. And it's also really exciting. I mean, it would be great if everybody would just cut economic ties with Israel now. But the fact that these things are happening, and especially coming from a country like Colombia, which, Zoe explained why that's so significant. But what gets me, Eugene? It's like, man, Colombia can do it, but none of these oil producing states in the Middle East can for some reason.
Yeah.
But we know which reasons. But anyway, either way, great. It's very, very important, very positive.
No, I think so. I think so. And I think, it fits in with other things that we've been seeing, that are obviously related, even though many of the companies are saying not. But Intel, for instance, just recently announced that they're pausing their $25 billion factory facility there. Again, they're saying it's not because of anything happening in the region, but obviously that's what's taking place. 2 months ago in April, Samsung Next, which is like the innovation arm of Samsung, announced that they were actually shutting down their operations in Tel Aviv, where they had a research facility that was happening there. We've seen that Spain, I think twice now, at least once, I think maybe twice, has denied as a port of call shipments coming to Israel for weapons. And also, of course, weapons is one of Israel's biggest exports. And we saw that France actually banned Israeli weapons companies from appearing at the big sort of weapons fair that happens every year in Paris. Puma, which is a longtime target of the BDS movement as a sponsor of the top league of the Israeli soccer football federation, has removed itself as a sponsor in that regard. So even though, a lot of these things people are saying they're not related, they're this, they're that, some they are related, obviously, or whatever, they're all obviously related to what's taking place. And so even though it's happening, kind of under the radar and kind of under the surface here, we're seeing more and more brands and companies and other sort of entities of that ilk starting to pull back from their Israeli pieces, to maybe not want the Israelis to show up at their, trade fairs and things like that. And I think the economic hits and the economic element of this, the sort of BDS aspect of this, whether it's spoken or unspoken, is obviously growing, in the context of what we're seeing around the world. And I think it's obviously bad for Israel, but I think it's also an interesting part of what's happening here when we talk about, as we did in the promotion for the show, about Israel becoming more isolated internationally.
Absolutely. And I think that trajectory, it's like you can't stop that at this point. It's not just going to suddenly stop. Wish it would happen faster. But, it does bring you to the South Africa example. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think you said it maybe in one of our conversation that wasn't on air. You were talking about the South Africa parallel and how long it took for, after a certain point when South Africa clearly was suffering the South African apartheid regime, was suffering like an existential crisis. It was like 7 years or something that it took for all of these, different things to take place, these different boycotts and sanctions and sort of punishments that isolated South Africa to the point where the apartheid regime did fall. And so we also have to remember in that context, this isn't going to happen in a day. But the developments taking place right now are certainly a foreshadowing of what's to come.
No, I think that's very true. And you see, there was actually a good article about this on Middle East Eye about people in Oman, but you see in Oman, you see in Egypt, where, unfortunately they're not able to protest as much, but people are boycotting, obviously there's no really Israeli goods in these companies, but they're boycotting American and UK goods because they recognize the role of these countries, France as well. The article I was mentioning about Oman, they were interviewing a guy who says, I haven't stepped foot in Carrefour since it started, right? And that he's now shopping at a different store that's owned by a company in UAE that sources most of its products from China. And the upshot of the article is, to the extent that people are changing their consumption patterns here, that may never go back. We've seen this interesting spate of things that, I'm very interested in, of people trashing KFCs in Baghdad, because that's like an American company that has now come into Baghdad after Soudani, the prime minister, came to the United States and said, we want U.S., investment, please come in. And they've come in and people are showing them what they think about them coming in. And so, we're also seeing at that level as well the same piece. And it goes exactly to your point about what happened in, the nature of South Africa. You look back on it, of course, saying from 85, 86 to 1994 doesn't seem like that long of amount of time. No one knew exactly where you were sort of in the plane of history, as it were. But undoubtedly, the tide started to turn there in the mid-1980s when major corporations, major brands, major companies, started to turn away seriously or even remove their operations totally. I think we're starting to see that, and we're starting to see these consumer boycotts proliferate across the MENA region, for lack of a better term. We're seeing what's happening in Colombia. We're seeing what's happening. Whatever you think about the various different UN resolutions, the fact that nobody is voting for anything that's in favor of Israel, and almost every single country is voting in favor of anything that's perceived to be a ceasefire, that, almost everywhere, Israel really is becoming a total is becoming isolated around the world. Obviously, since it has the support of the United States, fine, but it's becoming more isolated in the United States. I mean, the president of the United States is going to, at least has the potential to lose the election in part, and he's got many other problems, but in part, without a doubt, because of the war in Gaza. And from my point of view, I don't think you can disconnect the two things, because I think Biden facilitating the genocide is really just sort of the most visceral example of the failures on so many different other fronts that people are upset about, and a reflection of that as well. So, it's like Israel has the support of the U.S. right now, just like South Africa did. And all of a sudden, they didn't have it. So Zimbabwe, what was previously Rhodesia, same thing. They had total support from the West, and all of a sudden, they didn't have it. And I think, that was the sea change that was happening in these countries. And I think we're starting to see that around the world right now. And so even though the propaganda machine of Israel is so strong, every U.S. politician basically is for Israel. Even the ones who claim that they're against Netanyahu, they're for all the other Israelis that are genocidal, pro-ethnic cleansing, and pro-apartheid. Even though that is there and that sort of high politics of power seems like Israel is definitely winning, I think you look just below the surface, a lot of these boycott international efforts happening, whether it's private businesses, state companies, or consumer boycotts that are going all around the world. Indonesia, Malaysia, huge consumer boycotts. We're seeing that the weakness of the Israeli project is now being really, I think, shown to the world. So they can kill a lot of people, but you know what? The French and the Americans killed millions of people in Vietnam. They did not win. And I could give tons of different examples. 1 million people killed in Algeria by France. Just because they can commit horrible crimes and horrible violence does not actually mean they're winning. And in fact, in my view, Rania, and I'll stop here because I'm talking too much, the reverse is often true, that the inability to actually succeed is partially what drives the level of barbarism, because you are so frustrated that you can't find a way to stop these guerrilla armies and the millions of people in these countries that support them. And so you just pour on more bombs, more weapons, more killing, thinking that if you just do more and more and more and more and more, you're going to win. But in fact, it's a sign of how you're losing your grip, more and more and more in terms of being able to manage the narrative and control the people in this sort of apartheid prison that they've tried to construct.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't have said it better myself, Eugene.
Thank you, Rania.
And I think you're welcome. You're very welcome. And I mean it.
Yes. Well, I think that will bring our show to a close here today. Big thanks to all of our guests. Big shout out to all of our viewers, of course. Rania, anything you would like folks to know before we get on out of here?
Yes, I want to remind people that if you are able to, please do become a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News for as little as $5 a month. You can help support Breakthrough News to help us stay on air, help us keep growing in the era of, tsunami after tsunami of just warmongering, corporate-backed insanity in the mainstream media. And you can also do more than $5 a month. That's just for as little as $5 a month. I just want to throw that out there. I don't want you to think that you were limited
You could do
to $5. You can do $5,000. There's no one stopping you but you. But all that said, please do to become a member if you can of Breakthrough News, patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And make sure that if you haven't, you smash that like button, you guys.
Smash that like button.
Bam. It helps boost us in the algorithm. I love that sound. Anyways.
So you love the sound of your own voice.
I love the sound of my voice saying, smash that like button. I think it's great. I love it. I think you should make it your ringtone.
That will never happen. But nonetheless, thank you for that suggestion. Well, of course, as always, we really appreciate everyone, as we already said. Do what you can to support us. Also, of course, want to give a shout out to all of our friends at Free Speech TV who are watching live on your set, and big shout out to the team there for everything you do to make it possible for us to appear. We are going to get out of here on that note, but for myself, for Rania, for Breakthrough News, we will see you next time.